My name is Margaret, and at 68 years old, I never thought I would be starting over again. After 30 years of sacrifice as a single mother, I had built a beautiful house for my son Matthew's future. Every nail, every board represented the love I had for him. Then came that phone call 1 week before his law school graduation. He didn't want me there. I was too embarrassing, too ordinary, so I made a decision that would change everything. I sold his dream house without telling him. He only discovered the truth when he stood on the porch, keys in hand, facing a complete stranger in what he thought was his doorway. If you've ever been taken for granted by someone you loved with your whole heart, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. This story might help you find your own strength. I grew up in a small town outside of Boston, Massachusetts, where the winters were harsh but the community was tight-knit. My father worked at the local paper mill, and my mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families across town. They never had much, but they believed education was the golden ticket to a better life. Every evening after dinner, my mother would sit with me at our kitchen table, helping me with homework even when she was bone-tired from scrubbing other people's floors all day. Their sacrifice paid off when I became the first person in our family to attend college. That's where I met Richard. He was studying business, always talking about the empire he would build someday. I was pursuing education, dreaming of shaping young minds. We were young and foolish, marrying during our senior year with stars in our eyes and not a penny to our names. We moved into a tiny apartment after graduation, and I found a job teaching at a local elementary school while Richard bounced between entry-level positions, never quite finding his footing. When I discovered I was pregnant 2 years later, Richard seemed excited at first. We painted the spare room yellow and filled it with second-hand baby furniture. But as my belly grew, his enthusiasm waned. The reality of responsibility began to weigh on him. I would come home from teaching to find him distant, making excuses about working late or meeting friends. Then one morning when I was 7 months along, I woke up to an empty bed and a note on the kitchen counter. I can't do this. I'm sorry. 3 decades later, those 5 words still sting when I remember them. Matthew's birth was difficult. 36 hours of labor without Richard by my side. Just my mother holding my hand, telling me I was stronger than I knew. When the nurse placed my son in my arms, I made a silent promise that he would never feel the absence of his father. I would be enough. I would give him everything. The first years were a blur of exhaustion. Teaching all day, caring for an infant all night, stretching every dollar until it screamed. My parents helped when they could, but they were aging and had little to spare themselves. I took on tutoring jobs after school and weekend work at a local bookstore. Every extra penny went into a special account for Matthew's future. My close friend Barbara became my lifeline during those years. She lived in the apartment next door and would watch Matthew when my schedules overlapped. Her own children were grown, and she treated my son like the grandson she didn't yet have. "You're doing too much, Margaret," she would tell me as I rushed out for my third job. But what choice did I have? Every time Matthew needed new shoes or caught a cold requiring medication, the financial tightrope I walked became thinner. I developed a philosophy that guided every decision. Sacrifice now for Matthew's future. I drove the same car for 15 years, patching it together with prayers and duct tape. My clothes came from thrift stores while Matthew wore new outfits for the first day of school each year. I packed my lunch in reused containers while ensuring Matthew had the right nutrition for a growing boy. When other teachers talked about their summer vacations to Disney or the beach, I would smile and contribute stories about the adventures Matthew and I had at the free local museums or parks. By the time Matthew started middle school, I had worked my way up to department head at the school, which meant a modest raise. This allowed me to finally move us from our 1-bedroom apartment to a small 2-bedroom rental house. Matthew got his own room, decorated with space posters and bookshelves I found at yard sales. I still remember his face when he saw it. For once I felt like I was providing something special, not just the bare minimum. Those early years formed me as much as they formed Matthew. I learned to be resourceful, to find joy in small victories, to keep going when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. Most importantly, I learned that love doesn't just mean saying the words. Love is action, sacrifice, putting someone else's needs before your own day after day, year after year. At least that's what I believed love meant. I would learn much later that there needs to be balance, that sacrifice without recognition can lead to expectations that no relationship can healthily sustain. The early years with Matthew were precious. Despite my constant exhaustion, I treasured our bedtime routines. After bath time, with his hair still damp and smelling of baby shampoo, we would curl up in the rocking chair my father had refinished for us. I would read stories until his eyelids grew heavy, then sing the lullabies my own mother had sung to me. In those quiet moments, with his tiny hand wrapped around my finger, the struggles of single motherhood seemed worth every sacrifice. Our Sunday morning pancake tradition began when Matthew was 3. He would stand on a chair at the counter, his little face intense with concentration as he helped me stir the batter. More would end up on his pajamas than in the bowl, but his proud smile when we flipped the first pancake made the mess worthwhile. These small rituals created the foundation of our relationship, the touchstones we returned to when life got complicated. Matthew showed academic promise from the beginning. His kindergarten teacher called him exceptionally bright, and by second grade, he was reading at a 5th grade level. I channeled my teacher's knowledge into supplementing his education at home, scouring library book sales for materials that would challenge and engage him. During summer breaks, we would create learning adventures, turning museum visits into treasure hunts and nature walks into science lessons. Being both mother and father proved challenging as Matthew grew older. When he wanted to join Little League, I spent hours in our small backyard teaching myself how to pitch so I could help him practice. I sat alone at games among pairs of parents, cheering twice as loud to make up for the empty seat beside me. At father-son events, my brother would sometimes fill in, or Matthew would attend with a friend's dad. I pretended not to notice the mixture of pity and curiosity in other parents' eyes. Despite working multiple jobs, I never missed a school performance, science fair, or parent-teacher conference. Sometimes this meant going without sleep, rushing from my evening tutoring session to make it just as the elementary school play began. The relief and joy in Matthew's eyes when he spotted me in the audience always energized me more than any amount of rest could have. The shift in our relationship began subtly around Matthew's 13th birthday. We had moved to the small rental house by then, a modest improvement but still in a working-class neighborhood. Matthew started middle school at a magnet program that brought together students from across the district, including those from much wealthier areas. Suddenly, my son was spending time with children whose parents were doctors, lawyers, and executives. The first time I noticed the change was when I picked him up from a new friend's house. The sprawling colonial with manicured grounds made our little rental look like a dollhouse in comparison. Matthew was quiet on the drive home, and when I asked about his afternoon, he gave one-word answers. That night, I overheard him on the phone, describing our house as just temporary, until we moved to a better neighborhood. His first explicit expression of shame came the following year. I had volunteered to chaperone a school dance, excited to be involved in this new phase of his life. When I told him over dinner, his fork clattered to his plate. "Mom, no. You can't. That's so embarrassing." When I asked why, his answer cut deep. "Because everyone will know you're just a teacher. Jason's mom is a judge, and Kyle's dad owns 3 restaurants." I kept my composure until I was alone in my bathroom that night, where I finally allowed the tears to fall. Was being just a teacher so shameful? Was all my hard work to provide for him not enough? Still, I respected his feelings and called the school to withdraw as a chaperone, making up an excuse about work conflicts. This became a pattern throughout his high school years. My presence became increasingly unwelcome at his activities unless absolutely necessary. By the time Matthew entered his prestigious private high school, made possible by a scholarship and my taking on additional weekend work, the distance between us had grown wider. Our Sunday pancake tradition fell away as he preferred sleeping in or meeting friends for brunch. The animated discussions about books and ideas that I had cherished were replaced by perfunctory responses to my questions about his day. College applications consumed his senior year of high school. With his exceptional grades and carefully cultivated extracurricular activities, he received multiple offers, including one from an Ivy League university. The scholarship covered tuition but not room and board. I remortgaged our small rental house to make up the difference, never telling Matthew about this additional financial strain. When he left for college, I hugged him tightly at the dormitory entrance, fighting back tears as he quickly disentangled himself, eager to begin his new life. His college years brought even greater distance. Calls became less frequent, and visits home for holidays were shorter. He spent most winters and summers interning at prestigious firms rather than coming home. I told myself this was normal, healthy even. He was building his future, just as I had always wanted. But I couldn't ignore the way he would casually mention weekend trips to Aspen with roommates or sailing excursions with new friends. Experiences so far removed from the life we had shared. When Matthew was accepted to a top-tier law school, my pride overshadowed my concerns about our relationship. Surely, once he was established in his career, we would find our way back to each other. I imagined holidays in a home big enough for extended family, grandchildren who would know how much their grandmother had sacrificed for their father's success. This dream sustained me through the quiet evenings alone in our modest rental, planning for a future reunion that I believed was inevitable. The call about my parents came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My father had passed peacefully in his sleep, and my mother, who had been declining since his death 3 months earlier, followed shortly after. Their loss left a hollow space in my heart that nothing could fill. They had been my support system, my cheerleaders through the hardest years of single motherhood. Their absence made me acutely aware of my own mortality, and the legacy I wanted to leave for Matthew. The inheritance was modest but significant. My parents had paid off their small home years ago, and they had managed to save a reasonable amount despite their working-class wages. Combined with my own life savings and teacher's pension, I suddenly had the means to do something meaningful. After decades of careful budgeting and sacrifice, I could finally create something substantial for Matthew's future. I spent weeks researching locations, wanting something close enough to the city for Matthew's future law career, but with enough space to feel like a true home. I finally found the perfect piece of land 20 minutes outside the city. 3 acres with mature oak trees and a small stream running through the back of the property. The first time I walked the land, I could visualize Matthew's children playing under those trees, building the kind of childhood memories that apartment living had never allowed him. Working with an architect named Joan was one of the most creative experiences of my life. I came to our meetings with magazine clippings and sketches, explaining my vision for each room. The kitchen needs to be the heart of the home, I told her, describing how I imagined Matthew and his future wife preparing holiday meals while children ran underfoot. Joan patiently translated my dreams into practical designs, gently steering me toward solutions that would maximize the budget without sacrificing quality. I chose features with Matthew in mind: the home office with built-in bookshelves for his future law practice, the basement rec room where he could entertain friends during football season, the master suite with a view of the sunrise that I knew he had always appreciated during our rare vacation stays at oceanside motels. For the first time in my life, I wasn't making decisions based on what we could afford but on what would make a perfect home. To stretch the budget further, I took on a part-time administrative job at the school even though I was technically retired. The extra hours were exhausting at my age, but they allowed for the custom stonework in the kitchen and the hardwood floors throughout the main level. I wanted this house to reflect success and stability, all the things I hadn't been able to provide during Matthew's childhood. During the construction process, I visited the site nearly every day. The builders grew accustomed to seeing my car pull up, clipboard in hand, ready to check their progress. I learned construction terminology and asked questions about everything from foundation depths to insulation ratings. On weekends, I would bring lunch for the crew and stay to help with cleanup or painting. A few of the younger workers took to calling me Mom, which warmed my heart in ways they couldn't understand. There were elements of the house where I contributed physical labor to save costs. I spent 3 full weekends installing the river rock garden path leading to the front door, positioning each stone by hand despite my aching back. I planted every shrub and perennial flower in the landscaping plan, envisioning how they would mature over the years Matthew would live there. The vegetable garden plot I dug and prepared myself, remembering how Matthew had enjoyed growing cherry tomatoes in containers on our apartment balcony when he was young. As the house neared completion, I focused on finishing touches that reflected Matthew's preferences. The paint colors matched ones he had once admired in a home design magazine he'd left at my place during a brief visit. The kitchen backsplash featured subtle blue tiles that echoed the color of the ocean near the beach we had visited on his 10th birthday, a rare splurge funded by a small bonus from school. I installed recessed lighting in the living room because he had once mentioned disliking overhead fixtures. The financial reality of the project was daunting. Even with my inheritance and savings, I had to take out a mortgage to complete the house properly. At 66, I was signing papers for a 30-year loan I knew I would never live to pay off. The loan officer raised his eyebrows when he saw my age, but the property value and my pension convinced him to approve the financing. I didn't mind the debt. In my mind, Matthew would take over the payments once he was established in his career, perhaps as part of inheriting the property. The risk felt minimal compared to the joy this gift would bring. Matthew was about to graduate from law school, and several prestigious firms had already expressed interest in him. His starting salary would easily cover the mortgage payments. I imagined his face when I handed him the keys, when he realized that all those years of living modestly had culminated in this beautiful home that would be his legacy. The master bedroom was lovely, with large windows and a sitting area, but it was the second bedroom that held my heart. I designed it with soft colors and a window seat, imagining it transformed into a nursery someday. Sometimes I would stand in that empty room, picturing a crib against the wall and tiny clothes in the closet. The grandchildren I dreamed of would have everything Matthew hadn't. They would grow up in stability and comfort, never knowing the financial anxiety that had shadowed his childhood. By the time the house was complete, I had poured everything into it. Not just my savings and inheritance, but every hope and dream I had carried through 30 years of single motherhood. The house represented all I wanted for Matthew: security, success, family, a fresh start without the struggle that had defined our life together. When I stood in the finished great room, watching sunlight stream through the windows onto the gleaming hardwood floors, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Finally, I had created something worthy of the brilliant, ambitious son I had raised. The graduation invitation arrived in late April, an elegant cream-colored card with gold embossing announcing the law school commencement ceremony. I traced my fingers over Matthew's name in the formal typeface, my heart swelling with pride. After all these years of sacrifice and hard work, my son was achieving everything I had dreamed for him. I placed the invitation on my refrigerator, the date circled in red on my calendar. I began planning immediately. I found a navy blue dress on sale at a department store, more expensive than I would normally allow myself but appropriate for such a special occasion. I scheduled an appointment at the local salon to have my hair styled, another rare indulgence. I researched hotels near the university, booking a modest room for 2 nights so I could attend both the main ceremony and the smaller law school reception afterward. With 1 week to go, I was putting the final touches on my preparations. I had purchased a leather portfolio as a graduation gift, having it embossed with his initials. The house was ready, though I had decided to wait until after the ceremony to surprise him with the keys. I wanted that moment to be private, not overshadowed by the public celebration of graduation. The phone rang as I was ironing my dress. Seeing Matthew's name on the caller ID, I answered with excitement, assuming he was calling with last-minute details about where to meet before the ceremony. "Mom," he said, his voice oddly formal, "we need to talk about graduation." There was something in his tone that made me sit down, the iron cooling beside me. "What about it, sweetie? I've got everything arranged. My hotel is just 3 blocks from campus." A long pause followed, filled only by the sound of his measured breathing. "The thing is, Mom, I think it would be better if you didn't come." The words didn't make sense at first. I thought perhaps there had been a change in the ceremony, a limit on guests due to space constraints. "What do you mean? Has something changed with the ceremony?" "No, nothing like that." Another pause. "It's just that Amanda's parents are coming. They're flying in from Connecticut. Her father is a senior partner at Blackwell and Richardson." "That's nice," I said, still not understanding. "I'd love to meet them." "Mom." His voice took on an edge of impatience I recognized from his teenage years. "Amanda's family is different. They summer in the Hamptons. Her mother is on the board of the symphony. They have expectations." The implication slowly dawned on me, a cold realization spreading through my chest. And I wouldn't meet those expectations? You know what I mean, he said, the words coming faster now. They're sophisticated people. They move in circles where appearances matter. Amanda and I are trying to make the right impression. Her father could be instrumental in my career. And I would embarrass you. It wasn't a question. Not embarrass exactly, he backpedaled. It's just, you're not comfortable in those kinds of settings. You wouldn't know how to talk to them. What would you even discuss? You've never traveled outside the country. You don't follow politics or the market. Each word was a small cut. I thought of the navy dress hanging in my closet, suddenly seeing it through his eyes. A bargain rack special that would immediately mark me as out of place among designer labels. I thought of my hands still showing the garden soil under my nails from planting flowers at the new house. His house. I see, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I knew you would understand, he said, relief evident in his tone. This is a really important time for me, Mom. For my future. I need to focus on making connections, not worrying about, well, you know, about your ordinary mother embarrassing you in front of important people. I finished for him. Don't put it like that, he said sharply. I'm trying to build a life here. Career. You always said you wanted me to succeed. Ido, he whispered. More than anything. Then you understand why this is necessary. I'll call you after graduation, and maybe we can have dinner someplace quiet, just the three of us without all the pressure. After we hung up, I sat motionless for what felt like hours, the iron growing cold beside me. The house around me was silent except for the ticking of the clock my father had given me when I moved into my first classroom. 30 years of sacrifices played through my mind like a movie. The nights I had gone to bed hungry so Matthew could have a proper dinner. The winter I had gone without a proper coat because he needed braces. The vacations never taken, the dreams deferred. The life lived in service to his future. And now I was being told that I was not fit to stand beside him as he crossed the threshold into that future. That the very things that had allowed him to reach this pinnacle, my years of working-class struggle, were now markers of unsuitability. That I was an embarrassment rather than the foundation upon which his success was built. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window watching the streetlights cast shadows on my small front lawn, replaying every decision I had made since that morning I found Richard's note. Had I done too much? Created an expectation that the world owed Matthew something? Had my sacrifice somehow taught him that people were valuable only for what they could provide? By morning, my initial hurt had crystallized into something else. Not anger exactly. Something clearer and colder. A recognition. I had spent my entire adult life trying to give Matthew everything, and in the process I had lost myself. And now it seemed I had lost him too, not to tragedy or distance, but to the very success I had worked so hard to make possible. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, really looked for perhaps the first time in years. The lines around my eyes, the silver threading through my hair, the slight stoop to my shoulders from years of carrying both physical and emotional burdens. I had become invisible to myself in my focus on Matthew. And now it seemed I was meant to become invisible to the world as well, a footnote in his success story rather than a vital character. For the first time in 30 years, I allowed myself to consider a radical thought. What if I mattered too? What if my life was not just a vehicle for Matthew's advancement but valuable in its own right? What if, after a lifetime of putting someone else first, I deserved to be the priority in my own story? This realization didn't come with dramatic tears or anger. Instead, it arrived with a strange sense of calm, like a fever breaking after a long illness. I had been a good mother. I had given everything I could. But I could not give away my dignity. That, at least, I would keep. The morning after Matthew's call, I phoned Barbara. Through 30 years of single motherhood, she had been my rock, the one person who saw me as Margaret first, not just as Matthew's mother. She listened without interruption as I recounted the conversation, the pain in my voice giving way to a strange calm as I reached the end. So, I concluded, I've been uninvited to my only child's graduation. Apparently, I'm not sophisticated enough for his new life. There was a long pause before Barbara responded. What are you going to do about the house? Her question startled me. Of all the aspects of the situation, the house hadn't yet entered my conscious thoughts. The house. Yes, Margaret. The beautiful house you've poured your life savings into. The house you're still paying a mortgage on at 68 years old. The house you built for a son who just told you that you don't fit into his life anymore. Put that way, the reality of my situation crystallized with painful clarity. I hadn't thought about it, I admitted. Well, maybe it's time you did, Barbara said, her voice gentle but firm. Maybe it's time you thought about yourself for once. That afternoon I called Susan Green, a real estate agent whose children I had taught years earlier. She remembered me immediately and agreed to meet at the new house the following day. As I walked her through the rooms, explaining the custom features and quality materials, I could see her professional assessment overlaying my emotional investment. "Margaret, this is exquisite work," she said as we stood in the great room with its vaulted ceiling and stone fireplace. "The market in this area is incredibly strong right now. Properties like this with acreage and custom details are in high demand." Her evaluation came back higher than I had anticipated. The careful choices in location and features had apparently created significant value beyond my investment. "I can list it immediately," Susan said. "With professional photos and the right marketing, I believe we can have offers within 2 weeks." That night I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, doing something I had rarely allowed myself to do. I made a list of what I wanted, not what Matthew needed or what would secure his future, but what would bring me joy in the years I had left. Travel to the coastal villages of Italy that I had only seen in books. A comfortable retirement without financial stress. Perhaps a small garden where I could grow vegetables and flowers without the pressure of creating someone else's dream home. The house listing went live the following Monday. By Wednesday, Susan had scheduled 5 showings. By Friday we had 3 offers all above asking price. The family whose offer I accepted, the Hendersons, had 2 young children and spoke enthusiastically about the treehouse they planned to build near the stream. The mother, Catherine, was a pediatrician who loved the office space for her home practice. The father, James, was an architect who appreciated the thoughtful design elements. They were the family I had imagined for the house, even if they weren't the family I had imagined living there. On the day of Matthew's graduation, I didn't sit crying at home or make a dramatic appearance at the ceremony. Instead, I met with the Hendersons to sign the final paperwork, officially transferring ownership of the house I had built with such love and hope. As I handed over the keys, Catherine hugged me impulsively. "We'll take good care of it," she promised. "It's a home that deserves to be filled with love." I smiled, feeling a weight lifting that I hadn't known I was carrying. That's exactly what I built it for. With the sale complete, I made 3 decisions about the proceeds. First, I paid off the small mortgage on my longtime rental home, finally owning it outright. Second, I opened a special investment account designated for any future grandchildren's education, separate from any other inheritance. My grandchildren, should I be blessed with any, would never have to wonder if their education mattered to me. Third, and most surprisingly to those who knew me, I booked a month-long trip to Italy. The cooking class in Tuscany, the art museums in Florence, the coastal villages of Cinque Terre, that had decorated my classroom bulletin boards for years. For the first time in my adult life, I would experience these places firsthand, not just as aspirational images. Before leaving for Italy, I moved from my rental into a bright, modern apartment in a seniors' community across town. The complex had gardens available for residents, a library, and regular social activities. My new home was smaller but perfectly suited to my needs, with no stairs to navigate as I aged, and no empty rooms preserving space for someone who might never visit. The sense of liberation was bittersweet. I grieved for the relationship I had thought I had with my son, for the future I had imagined. But beneath the grief was a growing appreciation for my own worth, separate from my identity as Matthew's mother. I had spent decades believing that love meant complete self-sacrifice. Now approaching 70, I was learning that true love required mutual respect and recognition, not just endless giving. In the weeks following the sale, Matthew called several times. I let the calls go to voicemail, not yet ready to hear his voice. His messages grew increasingly confused as graduation passed, and I remained unreachable during my time in Italy. I knew a confrontation was inevitable, but for once, I was allowing myself to experience joy without interruption, to exist fully in the present moment, rather than constantly planning and sacrificing for someone else's future. The Mediterranean sun warmed my face as I sat at a small cafe in Vernazza, sipping espresso and watching fishing boats bob in the harbor. For the first time in decades, I felt fully present in my own life. The weight of constant financial worry had lifted. The house that had represented both my greatest gift and my most painful rejection was now someone else's home, being filled with the family life I had envisioned. And I was beginning to recognize the woman who had been hiding beneath the mantle of self-sacrifice for all these years. She was stronger than I had realized, more capable of joy, more deserving of peace. 2 months after graduation, I returned from Italy with a subtle tan, several journals filled with observations and sketches, and a newfound sense of self. My apartment felt like home now, decorated with small treasures from my travels and arranged for my comfort, rather than anyone else's approval. I had begun volunteering at a literacy program and joined a book club at the community center. Slowly, I was building a life centered around my own interests and connections. The confrontation I had been expecting arrived on a sunny Saturday morning in August. I was tending to the herbs on my small balcony when the community intercom buzzed. The concierge informed me that my son was in the lobby, insisting on seeing me. Taking a deep breath, I asked for him to be sent up. When I opened the door, Matthew stood there in expensive casual clothes, his face a mixture of confusion and barely contained anger. Behind him, a stylish young woman who must have been Amanda hung back uncertainly. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "What's going on? I've been trying to reach you for weeks. And then when we went to the house..." He trailed off, apparently unable to even articulate what he had discovered. "Hello, Matthew," I said calmly. "Please come in. You must be Amanda. It's nice to finally meet you." They stepped into my apartment, Matthew looking around with bewilderment at the unfamiliar surroundings. "What is this place? Why are you living here? And what happened to the house? There's some family living there who said they bought it months ago." I gestured for them to sit on the sofa, while I took the armchair across from them. "The Hendersons. Yes, lovely family. Their offer was very generous." "Their offer?" Matthew's voice rose. "You sold the house? Without telling me? Mom, what were you thinking? We showed up with the moving truck yesterday. All our wedding gifts, our furniture. We had nowhere to put anything." The entitled tone in his voice confirmed that I had made the right decision. He had assumed, without any discussion, that the house would be his, that my life savings and financial future were simply resources at his disposal. "I'm sorry for the confusion," I said evenly, "but I don't recall ever telling you that I was giving you a house. But you knew. You knew I was graduating, getting married. You knew we'd need a place to live. You've always..." He stopped, seemingly searching for words. "I've always what, Matthew?" I asked softly. "You've always provided for me," he finished, his tone making it sound like an accusation rather than gratitude. "Yes, I have," I agreed. "For 30 years, I've put your needs before my own. I worked multiple jobs so you could have opportunities one never had. I lived in a small rental so you could attend good schools. I forwent my own dreams so you could pursue yours." Amanda shifted uncomfortably beside him, looking increasingly distressed as the conversation unfolded. "And then," I continued, "when you were about to achieve the success I had sacrificed so much for, you decided I wasn't good enough to witness it, that I would embarrass you in front of your new sophisticated connections, that the mother who had given everything for your future didn't belong in that future." "That's not fair," Matthew protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. "It was one event. I was trying to make the right impressions. For my career. For our future." "Our future," I repeated. "Did that future include me, Matthew? Or just the things I could provide for you? The house I built? The financial support I've always given? But not the embarrassing working-class mother with her unfashionable clothes and ordinary life." Amanda spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but clear. "Matthew never told me you weren't at graduation because he asked you not to come. He said you were ill." Matthew shot her a look of betrayal, but she continued, turning to face me directly. "And he never mentioned anything about you building a house. He said his grandparents left him property that he was planning to renovate for us." I felt a flash of disappointment sharper than anything I'd experienced during the phone call about graduation. Not only had he rejected me, but he had erased my contributions entirely, rewriting the narrative to remove any dependence on his ordinary mother. I see, I said, the calm in my voice belying the pain beneath. Well, to clarify, Amanda, I used my inheritance from my parents, plus my life savings and a new mortgage, to build that house. I designed it with Matthew's future family in mind. There's even a bedroom I imagined as a nursery someday. I paused, letting the implications sink in. But when I realized I was no longer welcome in that future, I made a different choice. Matthew stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. You had no right, he said, his voice shaking. That house was meant for me. You built it for me. Yes, I did, I acknowledged. Just like I did everything else for 30 years. But the house was still mine to decide what to do with. And after our conversation about graduation, I realized that I needed to make choices based on my own needs for once. So this is punishment, he said bitterly, because I asked for one day to be about my career instead of your feelings. No, Matthew. This isn't punishment. It's clarification. For 30 years I've shown my love through sacrifice and provision. But love should be reciprocal. It should include respect and appreciation. When you made it clear that I was an embarrassment rather than someone you valued, I finally understood that our relationship wasn't what I thought it was. Amanda had grown increasingly uncomfortable, her eyes moving between us. Matthew, she said quietly, is this true? Did you really tell your mother not to come to graduation because you were embarrassed by her? His silence was answer enough. Amanda stood, gathering her purse. I think I'll wait in the car. You two clearly have more to discuss. To me, she added, it was nice to meet you, Margaret. I'm sorry it was under these circumstances. After she left, Matthew seemed to deflate, sinking back onto the sofa. What am I supposed to do now? He asked, sounding suddenly young and lost. We have nowhere to live. The apartment lease is up. All our things are in storage. You'll figure it out, I said, not unkindly. You're intelligent and resourceful. You have a law degree and job offers. You have advantages I never had at your age. Because you gave them to me, he acknowledged, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. Yes, I said simply. Because I wanted you to have every opportunity. But somewhere along the way, those opportunities became expectations. And my value to you became measured by what I could provide rather than who I am. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, he finally said, though the words sounded hollow even to my generous maternal ears. Perhaps not consciously, I allowed. But when you decided I wasn't presentable enough for your graduation, you made it very clear how you see me in your life. As someone to be hidden away. Used but not acknowledged. That's not fair, he protested again, but with less conviction. Perhaps not, I conceded. But it's how it felt to me. And after a lifetime of considering your feelings first, I finally decided that my feelings matter too. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 30 years of misaligned expectations filling the space between us. Finally, Matthew stood to leave, his posture rigid with unresolved emotions. What happens now? He asked at the door. That depends on you, I said honestly. I'll always be your mother, and I'll always love you. But from now on, our relationship needs to be based on mutual respect, not just what I can give you. He nodded stiffly and left without another word. As the door closed behind him, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. The confrontation had been painful but necessary. For the first time in our relationship, I had spoken my truth without filtering it through the lens of maternal sacrifice. Whether this would be the end of our relationship or the beginning of a healthier one remained to be seen. The months following our confrontation stretched into a silence that ached like an old wound. Autumn arrived, painting the trees outside my apartment window in fiery colors that seemed to mirror my own internal transformation. I had expected to feel more regret, more doubt about my decision, but instead found a growing sense of peace. The literacy program where I volunteered expanded my role, asking me to develop curriculum for adult learners. My small balcony garden yielded herbs that I shared with neighbors, creating unexpected friendships. I joined a travel group of retired teachers, planning our next adventure to Greece. Barbara visited often, bringing news of mutual friends and community happenings. "You look different," she observed one evening as we shared tea in my living room. "More present somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "For the first time in decades, I'm living my life instead of just facilitating someone else's." "Have you heard from Matthew?" she asked carefully. "No," I said, surprised by how the admission didn't bring the sharp pain it once would have. "But I haven't reached out either. I think we both need time." The first text from Matthew arrived in February, nearly 6 months after our confrontation. "Mom, can we talk?" Simple and direct, yet it took me several days to respond. When I finally did, suggesting coffee at a cafe midway between our locations, I felt neither triumph nor anxiety, just a quiet readiness. He was waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees already ordered. He had remembered how I took mine, a small detail that touched me more than I expected. He stood awkwardly as I approached, as if unsure whether to hug me or shake my hand. We settled for a brief embrace that held the stiffness of unfamiliarity. "You look well," he said, studying me across the table. "Different somehow." Italy agreed with me, I replied with a small smile. "And retirement, as it turns out." We sipped our coffees in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his fingers nervously tracing the rim of his cup. "About what you said. About our relationship." I waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "Amanda and I have been seeing a couples therapist," he continued. "Not because of any problems between us, but because, well, she was pretty shaken by what happened. About graduation and the house. She said she didn't want our relationship to follow that pattern." The thought of my son in therapy was surprising, given his previous dismissal of emotional work as soft science. That Amanda had influenced him in this direction spoke well of her character and their relationship. "In therapy, we've talked a lot about family patterns, about gratitude and entitlement." He met my eyes directly for the first time. "About how I treated you. And what conclusions have you reached?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "That I've been incredibly selfish," he said simply. "That I took for granted everything you sacrificed for me. That somewhere along the way, I started seeing your love as an obligation rather than a gift." His admission was more self-aware than I had expected, and I felt a small knot of tension I hadn't realized I was carrying begin to unravel. "I'm not asking for forgiveness yet," he continued. "I don't think I've earned it. But I wanted you to know that I understand better now, and I'm trying to change." We talked for nearly 2 hours, more honestly than we had in years. He told me about his new job at a smaller firm than he had initially targeted, one that specialized in environmental law rather than corporate defense. He and Amanda had found an apartment they could afford on their combined salaries, modest by his previous standards but comfortable. They were learning to cook together, to live within a budget, to find joy in experiences rather than possessions. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated, then asked the question I could see had been on his mind throughout our conversation. "The money from the house. What did you do with it?" In the past, I might have felt hurt by his concern about the money, might have rushed to reassure him that I had preserved his inheritance. But now I simply told the truth. I secured my retirement. I traveled. And I set aside a fund for education. "Education," he repeated. "For any grandchildren I might someday have," I explained. "Not a house, not possessions, but opportunity. The same gift my parents gave me, and that I tried to give you." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition perhaps of the values that had always motivated my choices. That seems right," he said finally. Our reconciliation was gradual, built on small moments rather than grand gestures. Monthly coffee meetings became bi-weekly dinners. He began asking about my life, my interests, my thoughts, in ways he never had before. I learned to express my needs and boundaries, to be honest about my feelings without the filter of maternal self-sacrifice. We were learning, slowly and imperfectly, to see each other as whole people rather than just as mother and son. 6 months after our first coffee meeting, Matthew called with news. Amanda was pregnant. Their first child was due in spring. Despite our still healing relationship, his voice held genuine warmth when he added, "We want you to be part of this, Mom. Part of our child's life. If you want to be." "I would like that very much," I said, emotion making my voice unsteady. When Emma was born the following May, I was in the waiting room. Not because Matthew had asked me to be, but because he had invited me, had wanted me there to share in the joy of his daughter's arrival. When he placed that tiny bundle in my arms, introducing me as Grandma Margaret, I felt a circle completing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Over the following years, our relationship continued to evolve. Matthew and Amanda purchased a small home in a modest neighborhood, using their own savings without expectation of my contribution. I helped with Emma when asked, but was careful to respect their boundaries as parents. Matthew began consulting me not just about childcare but about life decisions, valuing my perspective in ways he never had before. During one of my regular visits to their home, as Emma napped and Amanda was at work, Matthew broached a subject we had largely avoided. "Do you ever regret selling the house?" he asked as we sat on their small patio. I considered the question honestly. "No," I said finally. "Not the decision itself. I regret that our relationship had reached a point where it became necessary. But the house was built on an unhealthy dynamic between us. One where I gave everything and you expected it." He nodded slowly. "I think I understand that now. It's taken time, but I do. And honestly, this home," he gestured to their modest but comfortable house, "means more because we built it together, Amanda and I. It's ours in a way that your gift never would have been." As I prepared to leave that day, Matthew hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry it took losing something as significant as that house for me to understand what really matters," he said. "But I'm grateful that it wasn't too late for us." Standing at my apartment window that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I reflected on the journey of the past few years. The pain of rejection had led to an unexpected liberation. The loss of one dream had opened the door to new possibilities I had never allowed myself to imagine. And most surprisingly, the house I had built with such love and hope, intending it as my greatest gift to my son, had indeed given him something invaluable. Not the physical structure with its carefully chosen features, but the painful but necessary lesson that genuine love is built on respect and reciprocity, not endless giving or entitled receiving. The house that now belonged to the Henderson family had served its purpose after all, just not in the way I had intended. It had been the catalyst for healing what was broken between us, allowing us to build something new and stronger on the ruins of our old relationship. The gift had not been the house itself, but the difficult wisdom that came from its loss. As I approached my 75th birthday, surrounded by a life rich with friendships, purpose, and a relationship with my son and his family built on mutual respect rather than obligation, I understand something I wish I had known decades earlier. True love doesn't require the erasure of self. The most valuable gift we can give those we love is not endless sacrifice, but the example of living with dignity, authenticity, and self-respect. If my story resonates with you, I hope it gives you courage to examine your own relationships. Are you giving out of love or obligation? Are you being valued for who you are or what you provide? Remember that it's never too late to reclaim your worth, to insist on the respect you deserve. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and those you care about, is to stop giving everything and start requiring reciprocity. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Has there been a time when you had to choose yourself over someone else's expectations? How did it change your relationship? Please like and subscribe if this story touched you, and share it with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true love honors both the giver and the receiver.